Welcome back, everyone. Hopefully you've been following along our ongoing series, Mastering Autodesk Vault Setup and Optimization, where we learn more about setting up Vault Professional from planning to maintenance. If you haven't seen any of our previous videos, you can find them in a link in our description. Today, we're learning about change orders in Vault Professional, which work hand in hand with lifecycles to give you more control over your release process. Let's set it up, and as always, like, follow, and subscribe for more content like this. When working with change orders, there are a couple of major decisions you're going to have to make. One of them is the type of workflow that you want to use within your change orders. Overall, the change order workflow within Vault Professional is pretty rigid, but there are some changes that you can make. And by that, I mean you can add or remove what's known as the check state within your change orders. So currently, if we look at the status of our current setup, you'll see that the workflow that you have has the change order going from work straight into review. If we wanted to change that, we can go to our tools, administration, and global settings. Under our change orders tab, and change the workflow we're going to use. Now you'll see here that it's currently set to standard, but if we select check state and hit close, the next change order that we create will have a check state enabled. Now the location of the check state can't be modified. It will always show up after our work state here. What this allows us to do is to have a mini review process that can always go from work straight into check and check back into work as many times as possible before it moves to the formal review process and approval process. Now, this decision should be made early on. The reason I say this is because the routings and the people involved in these routings cannot be set up to be used with either or. If you set up a routing for one workflow, it will not work for the other one, and that's because the roles change, as we'll see later on. For the rest of this demonstration, we're going to go with the assumption that you're using the check state, but if you're not using the check state, you'll just have one less role to assign. The other thing you can configure within your change order workflow is the properties available. So on the general tab, typically we consider this what's known as your cover page. So if you're currently working in a paper process, you can use this general tab as your cover page, which then gives all the information required to complete this change order. You'll see here that we have some very standard fields to fill out, such as title and description. But down below, you'll see that the properties area is currently empty, but you can fill it in with any information that you would wish your users to fill out as the change order progresses. So if you want to learn more about creating properties and assigning them to change orders, check out our properties video. So once you've decided what properties and what workflow you're going to go with, the next thing we want to do is create what are known as routings. You'll notice here in the change order, there is a routing tab, and you will have a drop-down menu with many routings or templates, if you will, for this change order to progress. Now, these routings, I would say, are used 90 to 90% of the time and don't change. But for that 5% of the time where it needs to be modified or additional people need to be added, you'll have a good starting point to work with. So by default, the administrator here is added to every single role in the change order, which isn't necessarily the process that you want to go with. So what we want to do is go ahead and create templates or routings that match your workflow. Now, for each one of these templates, you will have to assign certain roles to certain people that you want to be responsible for within the change order. Now, these roles are the approver, the change requester, change administrator, checker, responsible engineer, reviewer, and notification user. Now, don't worry, you don't have to remember all of those, but you'll be able to assign them depending on what you want each person to be responsible for. Now, each person that is assigned a role will have a certain responsibility in the change order workflow. So let's take a look at what that looks like. Change administrator. This is the most powerful role that you can give someone within the change order environment, and they're responsible for many states in the change order itself. Typically, the open state is one of the big ones. The change administrator, think of it as someone who's in charge of this specific change. What you want to do is you want them to vet and make sure that all the information required for this change order is available. So we go back to, our general tab. We want to make that change administrator wants to make sure that the change order titles filled out, descriptions available, and even the records that need to be modified are assigned to this change order. So that's what the change administrator needs to do. So they're in charge of the open state, and they're in charge of pushing this change order forward into the work state. Now, the change administrator is also in charge of this approved state here. So once it goes through its whole process, it gets modified, changes are made and approved. It ends up in this approved state where the change administrator reviews all of the changes made, make sure that everything looks good, and then releases your files or your items to a release state before closing out the change order. So they have that responsibility as well. And then finally, rejected state. So let's say this change order goes through the motions, all of the edits are made, but during the final review state, something comes up and the change order itself gets rejected. Well, the change administrator has a responsibility in this state to look at the reason it was rejected and decide whether or not it needs to be reopened so that changes can be made further to the designs, or if the reason for rejection is a showstopper. If it's a showstopper, then the change administrator decides to cancel the change order and the design never gets released. So again, change administrator has the, I would say, the most responsibilities in this process. Then you have the change requester, which is not one that you assign. Whoever is creating a change order automatically gets assigned the change requester role. So this means that while it's in create, like our change order currently is, somebody has to come in here and make the changes, fill out the description, fill out the title, add certain records, and that person is added as the change requester once the change order is saved, and they have the responsibility to submit it once they think it's ready for processing, submit it into the open state, which then sends a notification to the change administrator. So moving forward after that, they follow the same rules that a notification user gets, which just means that at the very end of the change order, whether it is closed or canceled, they get a notification letting them know, hey, this change order ended up in this state and is now complete. So they do have the ability to follow along and see details about the change order, but they have no further responsibilities. Then we have checker. So this one varies depending on which workflow you picked. So if you do have a check state, then you'll have a checker role. And if you don't have a check state, then you don't have to assign this. And this is the reason that you can't reuse routings between both workflows, is because one requires a checker to be added while the other one doesn't need it. So the checker role is assigned to whoever will be checking the design before it goes to a formal review. So that person's responsibility is either to reject it with red lines, communicating the reason it was rejected, or to push it forward and approve it into a review state for a formal approval. There are a couple of reasons we've seen checkers be added to the workflow. One is they treat the check state as an internal review with engineering before it moves over to a review state where it could get customer feedback, it could get PM feedback, all other groups get involved in review before it finally gets approved. So it really depends on what matches your workflow best. Then we have a responsible engineer, which is in charge of the work state. So in the work state, they're able to make the changes to the designs that are required in the description. They're able to then either push it forward into check if they feel like it's ready. They're able to push it back into open if they feel like this change isn't necessary, and submit it with a comment to the change administrator, letting them know their reasons. And those are their responsibilities there. They may get more responsibilities moving forward, depending if the checker rejects it, they'll see the comments, they'll be able to make further modifications and go through this cycle. You may notice that there is an option here for a fast track approval from the work state. That fast track approval does not fall on the responsible engineer, it actually falls on the change administrator. They're able to push it forward directly into approved without any checks or reviews. Think of hot items that need to be pushed forward really quick. They could be in charge of reviewing what the changes that were made while it's in work and then push it forward straight into approved where they can finally release it. That is all at the discretion of the change administrator. Again, most responsibilities and someone that you want to be able to trust to make these decisions. And then the final role that we have is reviewer. So this is someone that just is following along in the process. They don't have any formal responsibilities, but they can always add their comments. They'll be able to see the designs, they'll be able to see the changes that have been made and add comments. You'll see there's a comments tab inside of our change orders. They'll be able to drop red lines in here, add comments to what they think of the changes. So what's really nice about change orders in Vault Professional is that as it moves through every one of these transitions and every state, a comment gets generated. So again, the reviewers will be able to generate their comments on each transition and add it to the list and history of the change order. The final role that we have in our change order routing is an approver. So once it goes through work, once it goes through check, it ends in a review state. Now in this review state, you have approvers that are reviewing the drawings, whether they're internal, external, reviewing all the changes and making sure that everything meets the requirements that were set for the change order. If they do agree with that, they'll send it forward into approved. And if they disagree, they'll be able to reject it, where again, the change administrator has a decision to make based on the reason for the rejection and cancel it or open it. With that in mind, in the review state, we have one other option we can go with. You'll see here that unanimous approval is not required for the current routing that I have in place. And that is one of the things that has to be decided for your routings off the bat when you're setting them up. Whether that review state needs to be unanimous, where every single approver you're adding has to say yes before it moves forward, or if it's a first come first served basis where the first approver that sees it is able to push it forward. And again, it depends on your workflow and how you're using it. So when you're creating a routing, you'll see here in a bit, there is an option to decide whether or not that routing is requires unanimous approval or not. So let's go ahead and create that routing. So we're going to go to Tools, Administration, and back into Global Settings. We're going to go to our Change Orders tab. And again, we've set our workflow type that we want to check state. So our routings are going to require a user to be assigned that checker role. And then we're going to go ahead and define our routings. So you'll see here, we have our default one with our administrator. What we're going to do is going to create a brand new routing. Give it a name. We're going to give it the mastering Autodesk Vault routing. And then you'll have a longer list of users, I'm hoping, rather than just in the administrator. But the process will be the same for every single user you add as part of this routing. So when you go ahead and hit add, it'll ask you what roles you want to assign to this user. So we're going to go ahead and assign approver, change administrator, checker for now. If we hit OK and we try to save this, it'll give us an error. So I did that on purpose just to show you guys what you'll see, but it lets you know that there are certain roles not assigned to this routing. So you will always need a responsible engineer, someone who is going to do the work. I mentioned earlier, it is a template, right? So if you know that the same person is not going to be doing the work every single time, that's okay. You can add a user that's going to be a stand-in for the responsible engineer. It could even be the change administrator, right? The person who's going to be in charge of this process. What their responsibility is going to be is to remove themselves as the responsible engineer and add the appropriate person depending on the changes that are happening. But whether or not, the person that gets added to the routing as a template is the person that's going to do it, it still requires someone to be added. Now, that administrator disappeared from my list of users because it's already a part of the routing. So instead of adding them and assigning roles that way, what we want to do is select the user and then hit edit roles. So this will pop up the window in a bit here. Okay, sorry. It'll pop up the window with all the available roles. And then we want to go ahead and add responsible engineer, hit OK. And now if we try to save it, it will create our routing. Now you'll notice that it still lives on our list of all routings here. If I want this routing to become available, what I have to do is basically select it and drag and drop it to our active routings. If this routing, is no longer used, is no longer available, we can always remove it as well and then delete it if unnecessary. But we're going to make one final edit before we enable our routing. So I'm going to go ahead and select our mastering Autodesk Vault routing, hit edit. And then under settings, this is where I mentioned we're able to select whether or not we want our review state to require unanimous approval. So we're going to say yes and hit OK. And then hit OK again. And then enable this here. So once it's enabled, we can even make it our default. I'm going to leave it as is for now, just to show you how it shows up inside of our change order environment. But if you do need to make it a default, you just need to select it. There's a button here that says set as default, and you'll know that it is the default when the check mark moves over to it. But I'm gonna default my default here, hit OK, close out of here. And now when I hit new, my change order window pops up. I go to my routing. I'm able to select mastering Autodesk Vault as the routing and hit save. Again, you're able to, once this change order is created and it gets rolling, you're able to come in here and modify that routing and add the appropriate people. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and save it. It's going to go ahead and create the record. And now that it's created, you can come in here and make edits to the routing and add or remove people, add or remove roles, make sure that all the people that are required for this change order are accounted for. I'm gonna go ahead and cancel out of here and close out of the change order just to show you. If we go back into our global settings and our change orders, if I were to change this workflow back to standard and hit close, now our change orders will look different. So the status and the workflow that it's going through will look different. So you'll see here the check state is missing. But not only that, if we go back into our settings, global settings, and change orders, when we go to define our routings, you'll see here that the routing that we created for our check state is no longer there. And again, this is just to show you that when you're creating or deciding on the workflow, make sure that you are sure that that's the workflow you want to use, because any work that you put into creating routings for one workflow will not work for the other one. So just something to keep in mind here. The final setting we're going to look at here is actually in our Vault settings. So this one, when you're rolling out change orders, if you're not currently using them in Vault, it helps to get your users to adopt it, right? You'll notice that in Vault settings, we do have a change orders tab and certain information that we can change for it. When you're rolling it out, there are some guides that you can put in here to get your users to move it forward, right? I mentioned earlier that it works hand in hand with your life cycles. Now, this is where these options come into play. If you look under options, there are 3 that we can configure. One of them is restrict file and item lifecycle state changes to change orders. This is the one that will force your users to add files or items, depending on your workflow, to a change order before the lifecycle state changes can happen. And that means, you know, if you're in the Project Explorer or the Item Master and you have this enabled, when a user tries to change the state, it'll throw up a message letting them know, hey, this file must be part of a change order before you can change the state. And then they'll have to go into the change order and make the changes there. So something, again, to help your users adopt a change order method within Vault Professional. So you can enable and disable that, and then also allow administrator override if it's something, you know, something that's hot or something that you yourself want to be able to override or not override. You can enable and disable that option. The other thing you can do is, as your change order is going through its own process, you may want to make sure that the files or the items are in the correct lifecycle state. So what I mean by that is when it goes from work into check or work into review, you want to make sure that your files or items are in the correct lifecycle state. And that just means, you know, whether it's a review state for your files, you just want to make sure that they're not in work in progress. You can configure that within these options. So if you go into configure, you can go ahead and pick the lifecycle that you want to use, and you tell it, while it's in flexible release process, it cannot be in work in progress. So, and apply this to files and to items. So what this does, again, is when a user tries to push, a responsible engineer tries to push the change order from work into check or work into review, it'll review all the records, all the files, all the items, and check their lifecycle states to make sure that, you know, nothing is in work in progress. If it is, it stops it from moving forward and gives the user a message letting them know, hey, these have to be in a different lifecycle state other than work in progress. And the user will then have to make the change. So we can turn this on or off as necessary. But again, it helps you get your users to adopt it. And then the final thing here that we have is the email that goes out. So when you're working with change orders in 2025 and older, the emails that go out from Vault are solely from the change orders. So you can customize that change order message that goes out. You can add or remove information that is sent out and the format that you have here. So this is the location that you can go in and make sure that you're sending out the correct information to your users when they get assignment notifications or reminder notifications. But that is change orders. And that's all we have for configuring change orders. You're free to go and configure it in your environment. And if you run into any issues or have any questions, feel free to reach out to us here at KETIV. But as always, like, follow, and subscribe for more content like this, and follow along as we continue on our Mastering Autodesk Vault Setup and Optimization series for more content like this from myself, my colleague Donnie, and Jason.